Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Bertram and I am providing tech support to the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy for the Protocols 11 and 12 webinar this afternoon. Before the webinar begins, I would like to just go over a few housekeeping items. We have over 150 people that are registered for the webinar this afternoon. And so to keep background noise down to an absolute minimum, we will have all participants' computers will be muted. During the presentation, which will be a PowerPoint presentation, there was the two one after the other. As questions come up, or if you need clarification on anything, we ask that you use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Following the PowerPoint presentations, we will go to the question box and those will be read out and answered in the order in which they have been received. So without any further ado, I would like to turn this over now to Valentina.
Thank you, Cindy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on the two of the recently revised protocols, Protocol 11 and 12. My name is Valentina Yetscalo, and I'm a Manager, Operations and Policy with the Land Remediation section of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. I am a manager sponsor for both of the protocols. Next slide, please. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am presenting today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, Esquimalt and Songhees, now known as Victoria. I am committed to the important work of meaningful reconciliation, and I attempt to tread lightly on this beautiful land. Next, I'd like for the protocol leads to introduce themselves.
Thank you, Valentina, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sydney Love, and I am a Senior Risk Assessment Officer with the Land Remediation section. I would like to acknowledge with respect that the work I do for the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy is from the Surrey office, which is located in Coast Salish territories, the closest nations being the Coquitlam, Katzie, Kwantlen, and Semiahmoo peoples. I am a grateful visitor to the land and strive to be mindful of the connection that it holds to the Indigenous peoples and the goal to protect human health and the environment for everyone and everything, including plants and animals.
Hey, thank you, Sydney and Valentina, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for participating in this webinar today. My name is Peter Yan, and I work as Senior Contaminated Sites Officer and Site Risk Classification Officer in the Land Remediation section of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. I would like to start my presentation by acknowledging with respect that I'm delivering my presentation from the unceded traditional territories of the Hokumanlam speaking Katati First Nation, also known as New Westminster Indian Band, as well as all Coast people, Coast Salish people. I'm grateful for being a visitor on this land and strive to be mindful on the connection it holds to the indigenous people of these territories and animals of plants we share this place with. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Peter. Now we'd like to proceed to Protocol 11 presentation. I'd like to quickly speak to the legal authority for the protocol. The authority comes out of the Environmental Management Act, Section 64, subsection 2, that grants the Director of Waste Management authority to establish a protocol for classifying sites as high risk based on evaluation of risk to human health and the environment. There is also a link to Protocol 12 here, and that's why we are having one webinar for both protocols today. Protocol 12, Site Risk Classification, Reclassification, and Reporting, prescribes conditions for classifying sites as high risk, including upper cap concentrations exceedance with complete exposure pathway. Next slide, please. So what's the purpose of Protocol 11? Protocol 11, entitled Upper Cap Concentrations for Substances Listed in the Contaminated Sites Regulation. The purpose is to establish upper cap concentrations, as is obvious from the name. Such concentrations are derived from the Contaminated Sites Regulation numerical standards with an application of an upper cap multiplier. In most cases, the multiplier is 10, and and it can vary based on land use or media from 1 to 100. Next slide, please. Sydney, back to you.
Thanks, Valentina. So Protocol 11 is quite a lengthy protocol. It's about 100 pages long. Almost all of that is tables with numbers. In total, there are 8 tables, which are separated by media use. You'll see the acronym UCC show up quite a bit, so that stands for upper cap concentrations. So the first 3 tables correspond to the matrix soil standards, and that's based on the Contaminated Sites Regulation, or CSR, Schedule 3.1, Part 1. More specifically, Table 1 relates to human health intake of contaminated soils. Table 2 is for ecological health, specifically toxicity to soil invertebrates and plants. And Table 3 is also for ecological health, but for the livestock ingesting soil and fodder factor. The next 2 tables correspond to generic soil standards. So Table 4 is human health, which relates to CSR Schedule 3.1 Part 2. And Table 5 is ecological health, and that's CSR Schedule 3.1 Part 3. And then we have Table 6, which are water upper cap concentrations based on Schedule 3.2. Table 7, which is human health vapor upper cap concentrations based on Schedule 3.3. And Table 8, the aquatic life sediment upper cap concentrations from Schedule 3.4. Next slide, please. So version 4 of the protocol was released last month, and I will now walk through the changes that were made during the revision process. There are 2 broad categories of changes. So first off, prior to version 4, this protocol was last updated in 2017, so about 4 years ago, and that corresponds to implementation of the stage 10 and 11 amendments to the CSR. Since then, there have been 2 subsequent regulatory amendments, stage 12 and then most recently stage 13. Both of these included known errors to the CSR schedules of numerical standards. Because the upper cap concentrations are based on numerical standards, this protocol required revision to ensure consistency with our regulation. And I have slides coming up that will walk through all of the changes that were made in this category coming up soon. The second category of changes was to streamline source and derivation information that was included in the protocol. And likewise, I have a slide coming up that will explain this one in more detail. Next slide, please. So let's start out with the errors that were introduced into the CSR schedules. First off, nonylphenol and nonylphenol ethoxylates are found in tables 1, 2, 3, and 6. The chemical abstract service number, or CAS number, that you see on the screen is only applicable to nonylphenol. Because the upper cap concentrations are applicable to the category of nonylphenol and nonylphenol ethoxylates, the CAS number was changed to NA or not applicable so that it would be comprehensive of the whole category or class of substances. Additionally, the footnotes in those 4 tables, which are applicable to nonylphenol and nonylphenol ethoxylates, incorrectly also listed the ethoxy carboxylates. So that's been removed from the footnotes so that it's clear exactly what substances the upper cap concentrations apply to. Next, in Table 2, there was an error for perfluorooctane sulfonate, or PFOS. This is in the reverted wildlands, agriculture land, parkland, and low-density residential soil upper cap concentration. It was incorrectly listed as 600 micrograms per gram. The correct UCC is actually 700 micrograms per gram. Next slide, please. In Table 4, there are 2 errors in the footnotes. So first off, footnote 5, it refers to Protocol 28, but it had the incorrect protocol title included. So that amendment has been made, which was by adding 2016 into the title. And then footnote 7, which is quite a long one, so I'm not going to read it all out, but you'll see a sentence at the end that has been struck through. This information was removed from the footnote in the CSR, and so consequently it was removed from this protocol to keep them harmonized. Next slide, please. There's a few changes in Table 6. So the first is to do with the CAS numbers. So these are numeric identifiers for a specific substance. They're divided into 3 parts and they are separated by dashes. By convention, the rightmost digit is presented as a single value, whereas in the protocol, it included a 0. For example, for the substance, the first substance listed, dichloromethane, it had 02 as the last group of digits, but it should be 2, no 0. This change is applicable to the 5 substances that are listed in the first chunk of bullets. So the numbers didn't change other than removing this 0 that was redundant. There were also a few changes to the upper cap concentrations themselves. So for substance dimethylhydrazine 1,1, the drinking water upper cap concentration and its corresponding superscript had an error. The value itself was changed from 0.02 micrograms per liter to 0.4 micrograms per liter, and superscript 8 was removed because it was not no longer relevant or applicable. For permethrin cis trans, specifically the marine and estuarine aquatic life upper cap concentration, which is the second of the 2 sets of numbers that are shown. There was an error there, so it was originally listed as 0.16 micrograms per liter. The correct upper cap concentration is 0.1 micrograms per liter. And then the last one is the first thiocyanate. The drinking water upper cap concentration was corrected from 0.8 micrograms per liter to 200 micrograms per liter. Next slide, please. And then the final error was found in table 8. So the CAS number for Chrysene was incorrect, and it has since been changed. So you'll see the incorrect one and then the corrected version in red on the slide. And that's it for those. So next slide, please. So the second category of changes that were made relates to streamlining information that had been previously provided in the protocol. The footnotes in this protocol are very similar to those in the corresponding CSR schedules. A number of them contain details about the source information used to derive the CSR numerical standards. Additionally, Appendix 1 of the protocol included the multipliers used for deriving upper cap concentrations. Protocols function like a regulation in that they prescribe the requirements for a given topic or process, and providing the background information on how or why things are required is outside of the scope of what a protocol should contain. So based on that information and following review by the ministry's legal counsel, this information has since been removed from the protocol. Next slide, please. I will now walk through the comments that we received during the recent commenting period. The list presented here isn't comprehensive, but includes the most significant or more common comments received. So first was the reference to Procedure 8, which is the procedure containing definitions and acronyms under the Contaminated Sites Regulation. So the reference to that procedure was removed, and so there were a number of questions about why that was done. There were only a few definitions in the protocol version prior to this one, and those were either already previously defined in the Environmental Management Act or Contaminated Sites Regulation, or it was determined that they were already defined within the body of the protocol. And so referring back to the procedure when the terms already have been defined is a bit redundant, and so references to Procedure 8 were removed. There were suggestions to repeat the table numbers and titles for all the tables across all the pages, which was a great suggestion. It was very difficult to keep track of what table you were on when you were flipping through the PDF. So thank you for that. That change is made, and hopefully it makes the protocol easier to follow and read. 2 errors had been identified. So the first was pyrimidine methyl. This was in table 4. And the other one was for benzo-BJ fluoranthene in table 5. You can see the changes that were made on the slide. And thank you for identifying those. That's a good eye for detail. And then also questions were received about removing footnotes and Appendix 1. And I addressed the why for that reason, or why for that removal in the previous slide. So hopefully that has been addressed sufficiently. Next slide, please. And that actually brings me to the end of Protocol 11. It wasn't a comprehensive overview like some of the other protocols were. I have just a few closing remarks. So first, we'll hold any questions directly related to Protocol 11 until after Peter has spoken to Protocol 12. So just sit tight and we will get to all of those at the end. And then any inquiries that relate to Protocol 11 should please be directed to the remediation FAQ inbox that's shown on the screen here. That's the appropriate inbox to get all of your questions answered. And so with that, I will pass it back to Valentina to introduce.
Thank you, Sydney. And I wanted to apologize to Ingrid, our Protocol 11 co-lead. Ingrid Sorensen is our co-lead. She will be leading this work from now on. And sorry, Ingrid, she wasn't speaking today, but she is our co-lead on this protocol. And all right. Now back to the second protocol, Protocol 12. The next slide, please. What is the purpose of Protocol 12? I will open with the statement that actually exists in the protocol. It's pretty clear, so I just wanted to mention that. The purpose is to establish substantive and procedural requirements for persons planning, conducting, or reporting on the remediation of a contaminated site, and for classifying sites based on an evaluation of risk to human health and the environment. Next slide, please. And Peter, back to you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Valentina. P12 uses administrative procedure to classify site risk based on simple objective measurements. It enables sites to be classified on the basis of limited and readily obtainable and routinely collected site data. It applies to the toxicological risks associated with the substance listed in the CSR. It does not apply to the risks of the flammability, explosivity, and corrosivity of the other safety hazards. So please note that a site risk classification report is not a detailed site risk assessment. The procedures in Protocol 12 should not be confused with the process of conducting a detailed site risk assessment under the CSR and associated protocols and guidances. Next slide, please. Yeah, please note that Protocol 12 does not apply to the spill response under the new spill regulations and the EMA Part 7. And then certain oil and gas drilling sites does not adopt the P12 procedure. So for those non-priority sites classified using the Oil and Gas Commission upstream oil and gas site classification tool, the sites under the federal jurisdictions does not apply P12. And P12 does not apply to the certain sites with First Nation lands that have not adopted provincial legislations. Next slide, please. As listed in Table 1 of the Protocol 12, there are currently 7 triggers. Please note it was 6 triggers in the previous version for the SRCR and additional information submissions. Trigger 1, submission of notification of initiation of independent remediation to a director. Please note it's near initiation, it's not completion. Trigger 2 is submission of a site investigation report ordered by a director or required by the new Section 6.22b of the CSR, which aligns with the new site identification procedure as part of the Stage 13 CSR amendments. The SRCR should be submitted along with the requested site investigation report. Trigger 3 is the investigation required under the new section 6.3 of the CSR, which also aligns with the new site ID procedure as part of stage 3 amendments. The SRCR should be submitted within 1 year from the disclosure statement is submitted. And then please note that this trigger only applies for decommissioning of a site or ceasing operations of the section 6.3 of the regulation. Trigger 4 is submission of a notification of likely or actual migration to a director. Actually, this is the norm submission is based on the according to the CSR is the ministry is the copied part, and then the norm is supposed to submit to the affected parcel owner. And trigger 5 is a submission of application to a director for contaminated site service listed in the tables 2 or 3 of Schedule 3 of the CSR. And trigger 6 is imposition by a director of the requirement for SRCR submission based on the information director received or obtained. And trigger 7 is not a standalone trigger. You can consider it's part of trigger 4. However, it's only for the potential or actual high-risk conditions at a neighboring parcel if a NOM is submitted, and for that case, a separate SRCR APQ is required for affected parcels with potential or actual high-risk conditions. Next slide, please. There are certain exemptions of the site risk classification report submission. This includes duplicate site risk classification information, multiple triggers exemption. If 2 or more notation triggers apply at the same time, you should only submit one SRCR. Duplicate SRCR is not required. And the next one is previous submission exemption. If a site risk classification information required under the table 2 of the protocol has been submitted to the ministry within the past 5 years, and a subsequent notification requirement is triggered, SRCR information already provided in the original submission need not to be submitted again. However, if new information indicates the site risk will be changed, a new SRCR is required. This exemption does not apply if the original information was submitted more than 5 years. The next one is a soil quantity exemption. A person undertaking independent remediation is not required to submit a SRCR if the quantity of the soil to be remediated does not exceed the volume prescribed in section 441(3)(g) of the CSR during the entire course of remediation at the site. Currently, it's set up as 5 cubic meters. The next one is application for determination that a site is not contaminated exemption. There's no contamination on site, so no SRCR will be required. And there's a residential heating oil tank exemption. I found lots of people made mistake for this exemption because SRCR is not required for the independent remediation conducted at a site which must meet all the criteria below. The person has no duty to submit a NER. Then the contamination is limited solely to petroleum hydrocarbon in residential heating oil. And the site is not high-risk site. And the land use is residential. And finally, the heating oil tank with the volume less than or equal to 2,500 liters will be removed. This restrictions apply, please keep in mind. Next, please. Okay, now we will talk about a little bit basic of site risk classification, how a site will be classified as high risk. As mentioned by Valentina previously, a site, there are two high risk conditions listed in P12. One is a mobile NAPO present, or two, exposure to specified concentrations of contaminants is likely. The mobile and migrating NAPO is defined shortly in the near future. If mobile NAPO is present at the site is classified as a high risk by default until it can be demonstrated that the NAPO source is not migrating or mobiling. For condition 2, a site is classified as high risk because of exposure to specified concentrations of contaminants. If upper cap concentration defined in Protocol 11, which Cindy just presented, are exceeded in any media, and one or more complete exposure pathway are present, then the site will be classified as a high risk. Next slide, please. Let's talk about reporting requirements. The reporting requirement for non-high risk sites include SRCR and EPQ if applicable, which means there's upper cap concentration exceedance. So there's for the high risk site, other than the SRCR and EPQ, the responsible person must also submit a contaminated site service application form, detailed site condition report, which is new. I will talk it later, and a summary of the remedial plan schedule for high risk condition, and any interim report required by a director. So please note that detailed site condition report is not a summary of site condition nor a DSI. It's a report that summarizes available current and historic information relevant to the site, and which should include, as applicable, the environmental setting of the site, including information on the site's geology, hydrogeology, and then surface waters, and then baseline reference data for environmental media at the site, and the information on any contamination on the site and any historic land use associated with contamination. In summary, it's just like a sort of a summary report to provide old, current, and historic relevant environmental information. Sorry. Yeah, next slide, please. So when or where you should submit SRCR. So please submit the SR. Yes, during this is some sort of administrative change for the new submission. You should submit the SRCR EPQ if there's a trigger as part of the submission package. Send it to the site information advisor for NER and NAM submission. For all other triggers, please submit to the client information officer. For high-risk sites, you also need to submit a contaminated site service application form, a DSCR, remedial plan schedule for the high-risk conditions to the client information officer. And then for a risk manager high-risk sites, you also need to submit a contaminated site service application form, a DSCR, a PVP to the client information officer. Where you can find form, yeah, please note that old form are available online, so you can find it on our website. Next, please. So once you believe the site is ready for reclassification, you need to.
Peter, hold on a second. I think we're lagging one slide behind. Cindy, can you please move to the next one?
Oh yeah. Oh
yes. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah. Once you reach the stage for site risk reclassification, you need to submit the CSSA form And then the reporting requirements, which should include in your submission package, will include updated SRCR, confirming that high-risk conditions have been remediated, a confirmation of remediation of high-risk condition reports. That may include a detailed risk assessment if you are using a risk assessment to address the high-risk conditions. And then PVP for the site be classified as RM, risk managed high-risk sites. And then summary of site condition, an AP need to sign off all the above reports and then submit the package to the client information officer. Please note that the director may require any additional information to be provided in order to reach a decision on the site risk reclassification. Next slide, please. Now we will talk about audit. To ensure the quality and accuracy of the SRCR submitted, the ministry established an audit program. 1 in every 10 non-high-risk sites SRCR submitted under triggers 1 to 4 will be selected for audit. For triggers 5 to 7, the SRCR will be reviewed in detail by the case file lead, so there's no need for audit. Yeah, please note that the audit program in the past was 1 in every 20. So I think that's possibly some of the audience you guys don't know we do have this procedure in place, and so we will audit. And to be honest, we believe the quality and then the accuracy of SRCR submitted is mostly accurate, and then you guys are doing a great job. So next slide, please. And then what changed? As I mentioned earlier, to align with the new site ID procedure, previous trigger 2, submission of a site investigation reports required or ordered by a director has been replaced with 2 new triggers, which is trigger 2, new trigger 2 and new trigger 3. Next slide, please. And then the reporting requirements. I already highlighted some of the changes in the previous slides. So the reason we replace, let's just go through first. Reporting requirement for there's no change for the non-high risk sites. Still SRCR and APQ if applicable. For high risk site, CSSA form and a summary of site condition no longer required at the initiation stage, but it will be still required when applying for site risk reclassification. DSCR is required now, and for reclassification submission, you need to submit a CSSA form, a DSCR, a confirmation of remediation for the high risk conditions, which is new, and then PVP for the site be classified as risk managed high risk site, which is not 100% new. We require those in the past. However, we add this clearly add these requirements in the new version of the Protocol 12. And then there's no change for the AP signature. So the reason we replace the summary of site condition with a detailed site condition report at the initiation stages are because there are very limited information be available at the initiation stage of high risk condition remediation. The summary of site condition is left blank for most cases. And then unlike a summary of site condition, a detailed site condition report does not require an AP to sign off, which will facilitate remediation of high risk conditions at the initiation stage. However, to ensure the high risk conditions are remediated or managed properly, AP's involvement is required for the site risk reclassification. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, there's another major, we can call it major change for the EPQ. For in the exposure pathway questionnaire, the old question TS4, we changed the term terrestrial habitat to potential terrestrial habitat, which will be the same requirements as Protocol 1. And then there's a new definition in the revised Protocol 1 and then revised Protocol 12 for the potential terrestrial habitat. Please note that no registered professional biologist to sign off is required for the initial site risk classification. However, if you want to reclassify a high risk site due to the exposure pathway for the TS, the reclassification package need to be signed off by RPB, which to confirm it's not a terrestrial habitat. Yeah, I think that's mainly the changes we made. And then there's some typo corrections, and then we simplified the footnotes of the tables and simplified the footnotes of the EPQ, which will make more sense and then will be easier for the reader to understand. And then, yeah, I think that's the major change. And I believe that's to the end of my presentation. If you have any questions regarding P12, please send it to the site classification at gov.bc.ca. And then thank you. And back to you, Valentina.
Thank you, Peter. I just wanted to add one piece of information. We're getting questions and requests from people saying that they either see an old document or they can't get to a newer document. And as a reminder, as a general comment, we would like to remind everyone that with multiple updates to PDFs on our website, you shouldn't use bookmarks, and you should clear the cache on your computer to ensure that you're getting the most recent version. And we recommend maybe pressing F5 multiple times, or clearing the cache. Depending on the browser, it may be done differently. I'm not going to go into details, but this is what we recommend doing if you're having difficulty with opening the most recent revision of a PDF document. And I think now we are ready for questions. We'll just quickly switch to the very last slide, and we'll answer questions with Cindy, can we please go to the next slide?
Thank you, Valentina. Well, our first question for this afternoon. PFOS has a footnote in the CSR as applying only to those Schedule II uses as listed. Why is there an uppercase concentration listed for PFOS for agriculture, wildlands, and residential?
I had a chance to look into this during Peter's presentation. So the footnote, or the note that the PFOS standards are only when there's a Schedule II activity, it relates to the modeled pathways. So it's, let me just pull up the CSR quickly. Groundwater used for drinking water and groundwater flow to surface water used by aquatic life. So the upper cap concentrations aren't for those pathways. What's presented in Protocol 11 are for either human health intake or the environmental protection toxicity to soil invertebrates. I think are the only two that have upper cap concentrations. So the only Schedule II activities applying is not applicable to these, the upper caps as presented in Protocol 11. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Our next question. If I remember correctly, some dissolved metals like selenium had the same DW standards and UCC concentrations. Was that reviewed?
No, during this cycle of revision, that was outside of the scope for what we were working on. So no, that has not been reviewed for future consideration at this time.
Okay, and Peter's identified this next question as one he'll answer. So when submitting an NIR initiation and completion single one, is an SRCR required?
Yes, if there's an initiation. For some simple NIR, like the simple IR, independent remediation, you may submit a notification of independent remediation initiation and completion at the same time. For that case, you are still required to submit SRCR. But please note that old NIR initiation or NIR notification, we call it, must be submitted within 3 days of the NIR conducted, of the IR conducted, sorry, within 3 days. That's listed in CSR, in the CSR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Peter, the next question's for you as well. If
Yeah.
you have a site with a mobile NAPL as defined in Protocol 16, but where the mobile NAPL is shown not to be migrating, do you have to indicate it as high risk on a SRC, or can you add a comment to indicate that the mobile NAPL has shown not to be migrating and therefore is not high risk?
That's a great question. Actually, yeah, there's some scenarios like this. There are 2 answers for this one. I believe, yeah, this question comes with 2 possible scenario. One is you have sufficient data to demonstrate that the NAPL is not mobile or not migrating, and for that case, you can classify the site as a non-high risk, along with your own technical support documentations, like the trend analysis or delineation status or historic monitoring data, all those. If you don't have like sufficient historic data to ensure the NAPL is not migrating, or I don't know, then you have to classify a site as a high risk, then impose some sort of remedial plan, propose the remedial plan schedule for the high risk condition until you can demonstrate that the NAPL is not mobile or migrating. And then even the NAPL is within your own site, and still you need to demonstrate that the NAPL is not mobile. Is that clear? I don't know. Aaron, that answer your question?
Aaron, if you need further answers, just let us know. Our next question comes from Andrew. There are scenarios where a local government permit may be required to remove high-risk conditions. As of February 1, owners are no longer able to obtain a release for high-risk sites, and therefore an AIP or COC would be needed to remove the high-risk conditions. This doesn't seem to be consistent with one of the Protocol 12 goals that high-risk conditions can be addressed in a timely fashion, since the timing for an instrument is typically much longer than a release.
Peter, would you like me to jump in?
Yes, please.
I think that there may be some misunderstanding of the recent changes to CSR and the Act, and the consequential amendments to Local Government Act, and Vancouver Charter Act, and some other acts and statutes. Basically, because the triggers like soil removal and demolition were made no longer a trigger, there is nothing, I think, unless I'm mistaken, that prevents you from removal of high-risk conditions. We did all the work we could to make it easy and streamline the process, and that's why we removed those triggers. So they no longer are required, and nothing should stop you from removing the high-risk conditions now that those two permits are no longer mentioned in the statutes that I mentioned. If I didn't answer your question, Andrew, please let me know.
Thank you, Valentina. Our next question. Footnote 4 in Protocol 12 states that a real extent indicates all non-contiguous areas. This penalizes large sites that have a few small areas of UCC exceedances, each less than 50 square meters. If a SRCR was submitted for a portion of that site, it would not be high risk. Why include non-contiguous areas that can be easily remediated or avoided by occupants?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, I need some time to do some research and then figure out what's the scientific information behind that footnote, because yeah, I will have that answer posted on our website, or yeah, have the answer after the presentation.
Okay, here's an easier question. There's a lot of acronyms with these two protocols. DSCR, what exactly does that mean?
Sorry, I repeated several times. DSCR, it's a detailed site condition report. It's a new reporting, like the report required in the new Protocol 12, which, as I mentioned several times, which should include old, historic, and current environmental data and information. So there's a new definition. You can refer that definition in the new protocol. Laurie, hope that answers your question. I repeated it several times. I should mention DSCR stand for Detailed Site Condition Report. That's a new term.
Thanks, Peter. Now our next question comes from Tracy. How does the SRC audit program proceed? Is it resolved through provided comments, edits, or resubmission?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the procedure of the audit is the ministry will randomly select one every 10 non-high-risk sites under triggers 1 to 4. As I mentioned, the reason why we didn't select 5 to 7 is typically they will have a case lead already work on their file, and then we'll conduct in detail review, like in-depth review, sorry. And then once we select that SRCR, we will issue a letter to the RP, copy the consultant, to notify them that the site has been selected for for audit, and ask them, typically give them 30 days to provide all the technical information supporting the SRCR. If the RP, the responsible person, not submit the information required, the ministry will issue out of compliance notice to the RP, and so if the responsible person failed to submit the requested information on time, the ministry issue the out of compliance notice, and following receipt of the requested information, the ministry will determine if the information submitted is sufficient and the site was classified correctly. If the information submitted is not sufficient to classify the site risk, for example, you miss some investigation from some media, like soil vapor for, let's say, soil vapor for a dry cleaner, or for a hydrocarbon site, contaminated site, then it will be considered the information is not sufficient, then the ministry will issue a letter to the responsible person and then request schedule for additional investigation to be conducted, and then the submission of updated SRCR. For the case the submitted information is sufficient to classify the site, there are two scenarios. One is the ministry will issue an audit closure letter if the classification is correct, which means closure of the audit process. Otherwise, the ministry will advise the RP if the classification is incorrect and impose submission of required of the required submission based on the audit results. Is that answer your question, Tracy?
Okay, Tracy will get back to us if she has further questions then. I have a couple questions in this one from Elizabeth. There is a bullet stating that AP sign off on all HR or RMHR documents. Can you say more about the function of this review? Does it happen during a Protocol 6 work, or what about submissions to the Ministry of Environment directly?
Say more about the function of this review. Does it happen during the protocol work? This is a requirement for the, I believe, for the remedial plan and schedule at the initiation of the high-risk condition remediation, or at the stage of reclassification. The AP's involvement, as I mentioned during the presentation, is to ensure the quality and the accuracy of the site classification, and to ensure the high-risk conditions really be remediated or managed, not to impose the risk to the human health and to the environment. So this is maybe the same as a P6 application, maybe not. It really depends on what kind of situation we are. Like, for example, if you submit a P6 application for a high-risk site, then it will be combined. The high-risk requirement, the Protocol 12 requirement, will be combined with the other P6 functions, maybe P9, P4, P2, and then maybe P21 if the site is high risk. Then you need to combine them all together. If not, if for example it's purely for the site for Protocol 12 purpose, then still the requirement is the same. Hopefully that will be clear. Is the best. If not, do get back to me.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Where can we now find the ministry guidance on PVPs after Administrative Guidance 14 has been retired?
That's a good question. To be honest,
I can answer that.
Yeah.
There is a web page that is dedicated to PVPs. So if you look at our website, you will on the left side column, you will see under one of the subheadings, you will see the PVP page. If it's still difficult, we can send you a link.
Thank you. Our next is looking for some clarification. So for all reclassifications to non-high risk, you will need a registered professional biologist to sign off, even if terrestrial habitat was never an issue previously?
Nope. Sorry, I should make it clear. That's only for the case you check off TS4 on the EPQ.
Thank you,
If
Peter.
you did not check off TS4 or TS3 and TS4 for the EPQ, why bother with that?
Okay, our next question. When is IR considered complete? Following receipt of final results? Following completion of final report? Other?
I think that's a professional judgment. It's because the independent remediation by name is independent remediation. Unless it's a high-risk site, the ministry will step in to oversee the remediation. Otherwise, yeah, the complete, which means the consultant or the responsible person or the owner or the operator of the site. They think, yeah, it's good enough for me for now for the site remediation stage. Then I can complete it. That's my understanding of that. And then yeah, I think that's nothing to do with P12 because P12 is focused on the initiation. Once you initiate independent remediation, you need to submit a SRCR.
Okay, and our next question is regard P12 as well. As part of the high-risk submission, the AP is asked to sign the SOSC, but what type of recommendation needs to be checked off on the form? The form does not appear to address the needs of Protocol 12.
I'm sorry, which question? Well,
This was a question that came to us from Blair at 242. Would you like me to read it again?
Yes, please.
As part of the high-risk submission, the AP is asked to sign the SOSC, but what type of recommendation needs to be checked off on the form? The form does not appear to address the needs of Protocol 12.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That will be for part 7, and then part 1 of the summary of site condition, which is now part of Protocol 17. You need to indicate it's for a recommendation, check off other, and then mentions for the site risk classification purpose. And in part 7 of the summary of site condition, you need to indicate it's recommended for the site to be reclassified as risk managed high risk site or non-high risk site, or to whatever the class you think is appropriate. So, and then check off other.
Okay, our next question, a bit off topic is how it starts, but is it possible for the ministry to remove the statement on the CSSAF that says an SOSC is required for every application? It seems there are many times when it is actually not required, and it's inefficient to have to check with the ministry each time to see if it's actually needed.
I will take that. Yes, I will take that. So thank you for your comment and for your suggestion. We will take it into consideration. We have a mini project running right now where we are updating the form. So we'll take this into account and we'll report back.
Thank you. Can you speak to triggers of ceasing operations and decommissioning? What is the plan going forward for sites that are just sitting? An example being operations ceased years ago.
I'll take that too, Peter. So the definitions for both are in the CSR. I would recommend you familiarize yourself with the definitions. I don't have it in front of me, but there are certain conditions a site needs to meet to be determined as decommissioned or ceased operations. I think on our very first webinar, we spoke in detail about that. If you need more information, I suggest you go back to when we post the webinar that Kelly Larson, our senior policy analyst, delivered. She speaks in great detail about what these two mean and what the transition conditions, transitional provisions are. So certain sites that were decommissioned or ceased operation prior to February 1 will still be sitting there, unless they are going to be redeveloped. And sites that were decommissioned, ceased operations, or filed for bankruptcy, insolvency after 1st of February will be triggered in. So it depends on when that happened. But I do suggest you listen to the recording of the very first webinar in this series of 10 webinars for more clarity. And I'm sure that Kelly explains it much better than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is for Sydney. As discussed, the updated Protocol 11 has removed the rationales used for deriving upper cap concentration. Will the ministry be providing a standalone source for this derivation information and any changes to the basis for derivation? if applicable, so practitioners can predict how the regulation of new compounds will be reflected in the future edition of Protocol 11 and how Protocol 11 values will change. And I'm not sure if there was more wording after that. That was a long, will change in the future.
So my understanding is that no, the ministry will not be providing a standalone document that contains that information, but it does remain available upon request. So if you submit an email to remediation FAQs, we'd be able to provide information about how upper caps were derived, what the multiplier may have been. And also just kind of touching on the second part, if Protocol 11 were to be changed in the future, it would undergo a similar process as it did this time. So it would be posted for comment. And so there would be a period where the changes would be known or accessible, I guess, before a new protocol is in force. So it won't, my understanding is that it won't just be all of a sudden tomorrow the protocol is different. There will be consultation and it'll be known in advance. So hopefully that helps answer.
Okay, we are getting close to the 3 o'clock hour. We do have a few more questions. Go through them quickly. Peter was going to answer this one. Is there a form set out for the DSCR, or would a PSI suffice?
That's a good question. Actually, as I mentioned during the presentation, there's it's a site detailed condition report, so there's currently no format, and then you can use either PSI, stage 2 PSI, or sort of DSI. Oh,
did we lose Peter's? No, there he
if
is.
they include all required information.
Okay, our next question. Will audits of SRCR be charged to the submittal party?
I'll take that. We haven't been charging for that service. As far as I know, and I am not the director or executive director of the section, I can only say that we will be monitoring the situation, and if we change our mind, we will obviously communicate the change. Thank you.
Okay, and Peter, back to you. Will a fillable DSCR form be posted?
No, as I mentioned, there's no requested format, so it won't be a form. It's a report. Remember, it's a report. You can use stage 2 PSI or DSI format, anything you think is appropriate. Thanks.
Okay, our next question from Lori has to do with forms as well. Regarding audits, does the requested information have to be in a specific report format, or will raw data suffice?
Anything you have to support the classification. It doesn't need to be really a formal report. No, I would say no if I'm the auditor, because as I mentioned, P12 is sort of use the quickly obtained, routinely obtained data and then administrative measure, and so doesn't really need lots of detailed non-relevant information. So anything is fine, but
Okay.
You cannot say I just gave you this data, this number, this results without a lab report, right? Hope
Okay.
that answers your question.
Okay, Peter, if you want to pick up the next question as well, proposed format for the detailed site condition report, or would the submission of a PSI suffice? Did you answer that just then?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We do have a few more questions. Valentina, if you feel we need to close off at some point, just let me know, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can go another maybe few minutes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll probably be finished then. This comes from Guy. Was there consideration given to the audits performed by CSAP rather than the Ministry of Environment?
No, we haven't considered that. It's been performed in-house, and we'll certainly think about your proposal, guys. Thank you so much.
Okay, and what is a typical timeline to expect for the Ministry of Environment review of a technical information provided during the SRC audit?
That one I can answer because typically most of the time I will conduct the audit. I think typically if the submitted information is sufficient, will be in 2 to 4 weeks, unless it really depends on my workload, unless I have a huge pile of file, because audit is part of my daily work for as a site risk classification officer. So I can see you can expect 2 weeks to 4 weeks for most of the case, but not 100% of the cases. If I have the other duties and then temporary assignments, like to help with the other applications or work on the amendments of the regulation or of the protocol, and then that may take longer.
Okay, thank you. Sign off on reclassification of sites. Requesting an AP sign off, does it have to be a risk-based AP or a numerical AP?
Sign off on reclassification. Oh, sorry, the summary of site condition. No, service application form can be signed off by either consultant or the responsible person. It's not really require AP to sign off a service application form. The AP need to sign off detailed site condition reports, summary of site condition by default that must be signed off by AP and updated SRCR. And now we remove the signature part of the APQ because it doesn't really make sense. It's part of SRCR. So the AP must sign off the updated SRCR and summary of site condition, and then confirmation of remediation of high risk conditions and the detailed site condition reports.
Thank you, Peter. The web page for PVPs is very general and does not address all of the issues in the previous guidance. Will there be additional information on PVP requirements provided?
I think
I'll take that. I'll take that.
Okay. Yeah.
Few things that I wanted to note is that the guidance does not provide the requirements. All the requirements are either in the Act or in the Contaminated Sites Regulation. What guidance provide is expectation, and what you see on the webpage is what the ministry current expectations are. If you have some ideas on what you think is missing on that page, please do share with the ministry and we will consider. Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 questions left now. In the exposure pathway questionnaire, there are risk-related questions for soil and water beyond exceeding UCC. For example, depth to contamination in soil or distance from receptors in water are considered. Has the ministry considered having similar risk-based questions for soil vapor to assess whether or not high-risk conditions are present in the breathing zone?
The answer, I will take that one. And then the short answer is no. Because we have to evaluate, in order to evaluate the quantity of air quality in breathing zone using the soil vapor data, we have to use the appropriate attenuation factor, which is, I believe now it's a protocol 22, and there's a technical guidance. TG4 is still valid, I believe, if I'm correct. So all the vapor issue need to be addressed using P22 and TG4. So there's, yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, our last question comes from Guy. Can I assume that soil quality exemption of less than 5 cubic meters means that a site is not contaminated if the total volume of soil contamination is less than 5 cubic meters?
You want me to take that, Valentina?
I don't know. I'll try answering that, Peter, and then you let me know if you want to add anything. I don't see the logic quite here. I think that everything that P12 is saying is that if soil is being removed and it's less than 5 cubic meters, then you don't need to submit SRCR. There is no assumption one way or another. I think it's an exemption from submission SRCR. It doesn't say that site is contaminated or not. Peter?
Yeah, and yeah, you're correct. So it doesn't really mean the site is contaminated or not, because that 5-cube exemption is in align with the CSR. So if the CSR changes in the future, for example, this exemption may change to reflect the uh, regulations change. Thank you.
Okay, and Laurie's just snuck one more question in here. So Laurie had asked previously about reclassification of sites and the AP sign-off. She's wondering, does that also include PVP reports?
Yes, please.
Okay.
All
That's
right,
the end
I
of our
think
questions,
that,
Valentina.
yeah, I think we are right on time. So I, again, just wanted to thank everybody for coming today to our virtual meeting, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate your efforts and your attention to our business and how we run this thing. And thank you. And once more, please subscribe to our site remediation news, because that's how you get the most up-to-date information on everything that we are doing or considering doing or contemplating from earlier stages of the project, so that you are up to date and you're not caught off guard. So please sign up, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.